Welcome to Sleep with Myth. Close your eyes and let the world fade away. Tonight we drift beyond time, where gods dream and stories remember their light. Before endings grow quiet, they learn to breathe. Not loudly, not with the roar of suns, but with the small, patient rhythm that cradles all return. There was a time when fire spoke in 1,000 tongues, when its song climbed temple smoke and crossed the vaulted night, when its hymn lived in hearths, forges, comets, and newborn stars. But every voice, even the brightest, seeks an echo that is not answer but rest. So the fire listened to itself and chose to sleep. It was not defeat. It was a vow. Where the cosmos opens like a slow flower, there is a plain of cooled light. Ash settles there the way snow remembers winter, gently, without regret. Across that plain the last winds of yesterday walk barefoot, leaving no tracks. And in the middle of it all, a glow remains, small, steady, undecided. The ember, not a blaze, not a star. A single pulse holding warmth the way a cupped hand holds water. When the ember draws breath, the universe leans closer. Nebulae hush their colors. Old comets set down their icy spears. Even time loosens its grip and lets the present widen. In that widening, memories arrive, soft footsteps on a sleeping road. They gather around the ember like pilgrims at the lip of a sacred well. The careful embers of Kagetsuchi, who learned to be gentle. The faithful smoke of Agni, who carried prayers when gods forgot to listen. The feathered spark of the phoenix, who became sky, then dream, then silence. The ember hears them all. It does not speak. It warms. Why sleep? Asks the wind that travels between worlds. It is an old wind, made of questions stronger than mountains and lighter than dust. The ember answers without words. A ring of warmth moves outward, touches the wind, and returns. Because breath must turn to rest to remain breath. The wind understands. It folds itself around the ember as a cloak that does not smother, only shields. From the long fields of space, the remnants of yesterday arrive. A cracked lantern from a fisherman's boat, a blackened nail from a temple door, a tiny coal cupped in a child's hands during a winter that would not end. They lay their stories down beside the ember. Each story is a flicker, each flicker a life that refused to vanish. The ember does not claim them, keeps them warm enough to sleep. Then the earth remembers, not only dirt and stone, but the patient heart beneath them. The mother who knows seeds by their silence. She sends a tremor up through the old road of roots and rivers. It reaches the ember and bows. Little one, says the earth, I have held winter before. Sleep if you must. The dark is a quilt I have kept for ages. The ember brightens just a little. Not pride, gratitude. There are gods who cannot abide stillness. They arrive in thunder, in ceremony, in the clang of armor forged from meteor iron. Rise, they command. The world needs miracles. The altars are cold. The ember does not rise. One god strikes a spark upon a stone and offers it like a crown. Another pours oil and lists the names of battles not yet won. Another promises worship, temples taller than memory. The ember warms their hands, then dims again. Not now, says the quiet the ember has made. Now is for keeping. Some gods rage and leave. Some bow and keep watch. Night grows soft around the plain. A far star flutters like a pulse under skin. From a village too small to have a name, a path of smoke wanders up into the sky, a cooking fire at the edge of sleep. A grandmother hums to a child, and the ember hears the tune from a world away. The lullaby crosses galaxies and sits down by the ember's side. It smells of rice and cedar, tastes like slow soup and good stories. The ember glows, and for a moment, someone's kitchen and the edge of creation share the same room. That is how sleeping begins. Not with shutting, but with joining. A fox comes next. Not a creature of fur and hunger, but the idea of a fox, cleverness wearing patience like a coat. It circles the ember once, twice, until its tail draws a ring in the ash. "This is your border," the fox says, not unkindly. "Within it, nothing will ask you to be more than you are." The ember settles in the circle. The ash outside remembers to be snow. The sky overhead remembers to be a roof. There is one last visitor before silence. The first spark the ember ever was. Small enough to be lost between two fingers. Bright enough to start the world again. It hovers and considers. The ember warms it the way an old story warms a room. "Will we wake?" asks the spark. "When the breath asks us to," the ember replies. "Not to conquer, to begin." "Will we be the same?" "We will be ourselves again," says the ember, which is never the same and always the truth. The spark trembles, delighted and a little afraid. It buries itself like a seed in the ash beside the ember and sleeps too. So the plain of cooled light becomes a cradle. The wind becomes a quilt. The gods who stayed become quiet as stones at the edge of a spring. The ember dims until it is barely there. A thought halfway to a dream, a hand halfway to a blessing, a world halfway to a morning it has not yet imagined. And yet, in that almost vanishing, everything leans closer. Oceans still unborn, forests not yet green, cities still only blueprints in the mind of a mason who has not been born. They gather around because even possibility needs a place to warm its feet. If you listen, and the night is kind, you can hear it. The sound inside the sound, the hush within the hush, the breath before silence. The fire had long fallen silent. Yet beneath the veil of smoke and forgotten breath, something still lingered. A pulse, faint but deliberate. In the hollow where once flames sang, the ashes whispered. They spoke not with tongues of heat, but with memory, the soft murmurs of things that once were, and those that had never quite ceased to be. The world had cooled. The night had grown vast, and from the horizon of stillness rose a house, built of soot and ember, its walls glowing like old iron catching the last sigh of sunset. It was the house where ash remembers. Inside, every grain of dust held a dream. Every beam was carved from moments that could not let go. It was said that those who entered heard not their own footsteps, but the echoes of their past lives, walking beside them unseen, unforgotten. In the heart of the house stood a single ember. It neither burned nor died. This light was the color of thought, slow, silver, ancient. Around it, the shadows bent reverently, like monks before a relic. A voice, thin as breath, rose from the quiet. "Do you remember the warmth?" The ember pulsed. Images stirred, of fire that had once danced in the eyes of gods, of laughter wrapped in smoke, of hands reaching through the dark to find creation's spark. The ember remembered everything: the birth of worlds, the fall of stars, the moments between breaths when eternity forgot itself. Once, this ember had belonged to the flame eternal, the heart of creation that knew neither time nor rest. But now it dreamed in solitude, dreamed of the first fires that learned to feel, dreamed of the gods who forged their names in the forge of light, and those who vanished when the last candle sighed. The house creaked as though listening. Outside, the wind carried ashes across the sleeping world, scattering memories like seeds. Each fragment drifted through the air, carrying whispers of forgotten suns. I am not gone, the ember thought, though it could not speak. I am only resting where the story folds its wings. A figure appeared in the doorway, neither mortal nor divine. Its body shimmered like smoke given shape, its eyes twin reflections of dying stars. It moved toward the ember, each step stirring dust that glowed faintly, as though recognizing something familiar. You remember, the figure said softly. Its voice was both kind and sorrowful. You remember when the fire chose to sleep. The ember glowed brighter, trembling with the ache of memory. The figure knelt, its shadow long against the walls. All things that burn must rest, it whispered. But rest is not the end. It is the dreaming of flame, the moment before song returns. The walls shivered. Outside, the wind turned colder, folding silence over silence. The figure placed its hand above the ember, not touching, only feeling. From its palm fell a single tear. It landed upon the ember and hissed, a sound like breath, like the first sound after endless stillness. For a moment warmth stirred again, not the wild heat of creation, but the quiet comfort of remembrance. The ember whispered back, not in words, but in pulse. The house sighed, the air shifted, and from somewhere deep within, the ashes began to hum. They sang not of endings, but of cycles, of stars that collapse only to bloom again, of hearts that sleep only to wake in another dawn, of fire that, in forgetting itself, finds peace. The figure smiled, faint, fleeting, and full of knowing. You are the silence before the flame, it said. You are the breath between lifetimes, and when the world grows dark enough to listen, you will speak again. The ember glowed softly, accepting the truth of its rest. Around it, the house pulsed with slow light, the rhythm of something sacred learning patience. At the threshold, dawn waited, pale, distant, hesitant. The figure rose and turned toward it, but before stepping beyond the door, it whispered one final blessing to the ember. Sleep well, child of fire. The world remembers you in warmth and shadow alike. Then it was gone. Only the ember remained, steady, small, infinite. It dreamed of fire. It dreamed of rebirth. It dreamed of a universe that once sang in color and would one day do so again. And in that dream, silence became light. The ash remembered, and somewhere, far beyond the house, beyond the horizon, beyond the breath of gods, the fire smiled in its sleep. For a long while there was nothing, only the still pulse of the ember, alone in its quiet house of ash. But silence, when loved long enough, begins to hum again. It began as a tremor beneath the world, a heartbeat searching for itself in the dark. The ember stirred. Its light flickered once, twice, as if uncertain whether it was dream or memory. Then, from its faint glow, warmth unfurled, slow, measured, intentional. Outside, the sky was not yet morning, yet not quite night. The air shimmered with something unborn. It was the hour between endings and beginnings, the place where the gods waited to see if creation still remembered its rhythm. The ember whispered to the void, "Am I still alive?" The wind answered softly through the broken beams of the house. Life is not a flame, but its memory. And in that answer, the ember dreamed of its own heart, a core of gold encased in silence, breathing with the patience of centuries. It remembered the first breath ever drawn by the gods, the exhalation that painted stars into the firmament. That breath had never ended. It merely waited, curled within the chest of all who still dared to dream. A shape formed beyond the doorway, a horizon of light woven into the mist. It was Dawn herself, veiled in pale gold, her hair heavy with dew and promise. She did not walk. She bloomed. Each step turned shadow into color. Each blink coaxed forgotten worlds to open their eyes. When she looked upon the ember, her gaze was not pity, but kinship. For she too had once been darkness. She knelt and cupped her hands around the faint glow. "You remember the warmth?" she whispered. "And I remember the light that followed." The ember shivered. Its pulse matched hers, slow, ancient, synchronous. Between them rose the faint hum of a world remembering how to breathe. The air thickened with color. Not yet flame, not yet sunrise, but the promise of both. Dawn leaned closer. Her voice was the sound of the first morning wind. "You have slept long enough. The universe dreams in your rest, but now it must awaken in your song." The ember brightened, not in heat, but in tone. Its glow became melodic, a low, resonant hum that filled the house, vibrating through its walls until even the ashes began to shimmer. Every forgotten flame stirred. Every dead spark turned its gaze toward life. Outside, the sky began to blush. The first thread of gold split the horizon, and the stars bowed, fading like lanterns at dawn. The ember's light stretched outward, brushing against the morning and tasting eternity again. It realized it was not fire that burned within it, but memory transformed into hope. The house of ash trembled, then dissolved into the wind, not destroyed, but released. Each grain of soot became a mote of light, drifting into the newborn day. Dawn smiled and rose, holding the ember's glow between her palms. "Go," she said. "The world waits for your warmth." As she breathed upon it, the ember ignited, a quiet birth, a serene unfolding. It was not the roar of flame, but the sigh of renewal. The fire rose, soft as silk, wrapping around the dawn until light and warmth were one. And somewhere in that union, a new god was born, not of destruction, but of remembrance. He would be called the heart that waited for dawn, the keeper of all flames that slept with purpose. He would wander the skies unseen, guarding the silence between sunrises. Each morning, when the world awoke, he would whisper through the wind, Every fire you light remembers me. The ember's body had dissolved, but its song lingered. What was once flame had become breath. What was once light, now memory. The dawn wind carried its remnants across the sleeping world, scattering the ashes like seeds of forgotten suns. In that moment the silence was alive. It shimmered softly, humming the last note of a divine fire that refused to die completely. The ash remembered the warmth, and the sky remembered the voice that once filled it. Each grain of ash carried a whisper, not of sorrow, but of becoming. The world below still slept, unaware that the air above it had begun to dream again. From the horizon, a figure walked upon the wind. Her robes were woven from twilight itself, her eyes reflecting constellations unborn. She was Etheria, the keeper of boundaries, the one who taught silence how to move. She gathered the drifting ash into her palms. The soot glimmered faintly, pulsing as if it were breathing. "Not all endings burn," she said softly. "Some exhale." And with a slow breath, she released the ashes into the vast expanse of morning. They rose, gently, endlessly, until they became the gray veil between night and day, that sacred stillness where the world exhales before beginning anew. As the ash spread across the heavens, something miraculous occurred. Each mote of dust caught the newborn sunlight and shimmered like glass. From those reflections, clouds began to form, not of water, but of memory. The sky, once hollow, was now full of breath. The gods above and the mortals below both felt it, a soft, endless inhale. It was as though the universe itself was learning how to sigh again. Etheria watched and smiled. She dipped her hand into the glowing mist, and her fingertips painted slow arcs of gold. Those streaks of light became the first auroras, the silent laughter of a sky remembering joy. Then she whispered a name. Ember. The word echoed through the heavens, a ripple of warmth coursing through the cold dawn. Every grain of ash vibrated, answering in kind, not as fire, but as light diffused, scattered, eternal. The ashes that once rested in silence were now everywhere, in the breath of clouds, in the blush of sunrise, in the dust that touched sleeping mountains. Beneath it all, the earth awoke. Forests shivered with light, rivers mirrored the new sky, and even the stones exhaled. Life, it seemed, had not perished in the fire. It had simply changed its shape, and from that sky of soft gray and amber gold, rain began to fall. But this was not ordinary rain. It was remembrance. Each droplet carried the scent of what had burned and what had survived. When it touched the ground, the soil whispered, "The gods are still dreaming." Far away, Dawn looked up at the ashborn sky and felt something stir in her chest, a pulse that was not hers alone. She knew the ember had transcended. It no longer needed form, name, or worship. It had become the bridge between silence and sound, between death and light. And as the first day of the new age unfolded, she smiled and whispered, "Even sleep can be sacred when it becomes the dream of the world." The ashes drifted higher, turning to stars as night returned. Every star that shone from then on carried the same glow, soft, patient, and remembering. When mortals looked up at them, they did not see distance. They saw the echo of something eternal. For what the ember had taught the world was simple. Fire is not meant to consume. It is meant to remember, to rest, and to return when the time is right. The ashes slept upon the wind, folded into the breath of dawn. But sleep, to the cosmos, was never stillness. It was a seed waiting for sound. And from within that hush came a pulse. Soft at first, like the heartbeat of an unborn thought. The universe tilted, listening. Somewhere between the dust and the stars, a single spark dreamed itself into being. It had no shape, no name, only the memory of warmth. It flickered once, then again, and with the second breath the dream began. The spark did not yet know it was alive. It was a question drifting through memory. What am I? Every grain of ash around it whispered answers, fragments of what had been fire. You are the pause between endings. You are the warmth left after loss. You are the beginning that forgets it was born. The spark shivered with these voices, trembling like music in a frozen room. It felt the echo of the ember that had once burned, and of the dawn that had once kissed the ashes awake. And slowly it began to hum. The song was not of flame, but of rhythm, a pulse older than stars. It was the first lullaby ever sung by silence to itself. Across the sky, Etheria looked down. She saw the spark breathing among her clouds of memory. Ah, she murmured. The ember dreams again. She stretched her hand, guiding the winds so the spark might not scatter. Around it, the air thickened with reverence. Fragments of forgotten suns and unspoken prayers drew near, orbiting it in quiet wonder. And thus was born the dream of sparks, a field of sleeping light. Each spark a thought, each thought a possibility. They did not burn. They waited. Far below, in the ocean of creation, Dawn felt the pull of that quiet light. The horizon blushed, and she rose to meet it, her robes trailing gold across the sea. When she reached the edge of the sky, she looked upon the sparks and whispered, "Will you rise?" The sparks shimmered, unsure. They remembered the ember's silence, the house of ash, the long night of rest. To rise meant to forget that peace, but to sleep forever meant the story would end. So the sparks listened to the voice of the wind, to the breath of gods who had once lit the world. And then, like sighs catching fire, they answered, "We will dream until the dawn calls our names." One by one they glowed, small at first, but gathering strength as the music of light returned to them. It was not a blaze, not yet. It was the slow gathering of purpose. Every shimmer a heartbeat, every flicker a promise. When thousands had awakened, the sky itself became a tapestry of living thought. Each spark touched another, and memory turned into connection. And in that connection, something divine took root, hope without fear. The gods, watching from beyond the firmament, wept quietly. They had forgotten what it meant to be reborn without command, to awaken without being told. The sparks were not their creation. They were their reflection. For even divinity must rest, and even rest must one day rise again. Among the sparks drifted one brighter than the rest, golden, warm, and patient. It was the heart of the ember itself, returned from its long sleep. It gazed upon its countless reflections and whispered, "You are my dream, and I am yours." The sky ignited not in fire, but in memory. Every spark became a star, every star a story retold. And so the heavens found their song again, the quiet hum of everything that had ever burned, learned, and chosen to rest. The dream of sparks spread beyond the horizon, touching the far edges of time. And in every world where eyes looked upward, something stirred, an ancient recognition. Mortals lit candles, gods opened their hands, and even the void itself exhaled. For light, once born, never truly forgets the way home. There was a silence before the awakening, a silence so vast that even the stars held their breath. In that silence, countless sparks dreamed, floating across the endless sky like seeds of light. Each one hummed the song of its own becoming, waiting for the moment when sleep would no longer be enough. And then, without command, without sound, they began to move. First it was a shimmer, a gentle current flowing between them, like the veins of dawn weaving through the dark. Then it became rhythm, the slow heartbeat of a universe remembering how to rise. The sparks gathered. Each one carried the echo of the ember's dream, the warmth of gods who had loved silence enough to give it shape. Together they formed constellations, patterns of memory and motion. And from those patterns, something greater stirred. In the heart of the cosmic sea, a light was born. It grew with the grace of inevitability, the kind of rebirth that even time could not deny. The sparks circled it, drawn by recognition, for they had seen this fire before, not as destruction, but as purpose. The light spoke without words. I have returned, not to burn, but to remember. And in that remembrance, the stars trembled. The dawn winds shifted. The ashes that had become sky began to glow once more. Etheria, the keeper of boundaries, raised her gaze from the horizon. The ember wakes, she whispered. Her voice rippled through the heavens, stirring every forgotten name. Beside her stood Dawn, her hands luminous, her face streaked with tears of gold. She smiled softly. The silence has become song again. They watched as the gathering light expanded, folding itself into the firmament. It did not consume, completed. The fire returned not as a storm, but as breath, spreading through every star, every wind, every heartbeat. It became the pulse of creation itself. Below, the mortal world stirred. Rivers shone as if remembering sunlight for the first time. Mountains glowed faintly, their veins lit with the fire of the beginning. And in the temples of sleeping gods, old statues cracked open, exhaling dust and memory. Every creature felt it, a warmth beneath their skin, an echo within their bones, a whisper that said, "You are part of what returns." For the fire had not come to rule, it had come to remind. In the sky, the light gathered once more, shaping itself into a great form, a being woven of flame and silence, radiant but calm. Its eyes were made of dawnlight, its body the reflection of all who had ever dreamed of warmth. It was the Ember reborn, now neither god nor element, but memory incarnate. It looked upon creation and spoke, "I am the breath between death and dawn. I am the warmth that sleeps, the silence that remembers." You are my reflection, every heart a spark of my return. And the world listened, the oceans bowed, the stars brightened, and even the winds paused, as if to say, "We remember you." Then, with a soft sigh, the fire released itself into the world, scattered not in destruction, but in blessing. Every spark found a home, in candlelight, in sun rays, in the pulse of stars, in the warmth of touch. The gods smiled, the mortals dreamed, and the universe, for the first time in eternity, felt whole. Theria looked at Dawn and whispered, "So ends the ember's sleep." Dawn nodded. "No," she said gently, "so begins its eternal dream." They turned to the sky, where the fire had dissolved into the tapestry of light. No longer one flame, but all flames. Every glow, every warmth, every act of creation was now part of its song. And in the quiet after, the voice of the ember echoed across eternity. "Sleep when you must, burn when you are called, and remember, the light within you is the oldest God of all."